My father spent 34 years calling me the affair child because he said I was too pretty to belong to him. He treated my mother like a cheater every single day until she died. When he threatened to cut me out of his will completely, I finally took a DNA test to shut him up once and for all. But the results did not just prove him wrong. They revealed that I was not his child, and I was not my mother's child either. We flew to the hospital where I was born to find the truth, and what the head nurse confessed made my father collapse on the spot. Before I tell you how a simple test destroyed my entire family tree, please like this video and subscribe to the channel if you have ever had to fight for your place in your own family. I am Ebony, 34 years old, and despite being a top forensic accountant who hunts down fraud for Fortune 500 companies, I could never audit my way into my father is heart. It was a humid Saturday evening in Buckhead, Atlanta. My father Elijah was celebrating his 60th birthday. His estate was lined with luxury cars, and the sound of smooth jazz floated through the open French doors. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, just breathing, gripping the velvet box in my passenger seat. Inside was a $40,000 Rolex custom engraved. It was my peace offering. It was proof that I did not need his money, but I still wanted his love. When I walked into the ballroom, the air shifted. The chatter died down. My father stood near the fireplace holding a glass of scotch, looking regal in his tuxedo. He looked like the picture of black excellence, but I knew the cruelty that lived behind those eyes. I walked straight to him, my heels clicking on the marble floor, echoing in the silence. "Happy birthday, Dad," I said, keeping my voice steady. I held out the box. He did not take it. He looked at the box, then at my face with a sneer that twisted his features. He used one finger to push the box away. It fell from my hand and hit the floor with a heavy thud. The expensive watch likely shattered inside, but he did not blink. "Do not use your dirty money to buy me off, Ebony," he said, his voice loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I do not want gifts from an affair child. You are a stain on this family, and you always have been. Look at you. You do not even look like us with your light skin and arrogance." He took a sip of his drink and turned his back on me. I stood there humiliated, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks as 50 pairs of eyes burned into me. I wanted to scream that I was the only one of his children who actually earned my own money, but I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. This was the moment I realized that no amount of success would ever make him see me as his daughter. Before the echo of my father's rejection had even faded, Courtney stepped forward. My sister-in-law moved with the predatory grace of a woman who had married into money and was terrified of losing it. She wore a red dress that was too tight and too bright for the occasion, but my father tolerated it because she was white and she had given him a grandson. She bent down and picked up the velvet box from the floor, dusting it off with a theatrical sigh that made my blood boil. "Oh dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. She popped the box open and squinted at the Rolex like a pawn shop owner inspecting a cheap knockoff. "Are you sure this is real, Ebony? I mean, I know you have that little accounting job, but a $40,000 watch seems a bit out of your budget. Maybe you should have just bought him a nice card. It is the thought that counts, right?" She snapped the box shut and tossed it onto a nearby waiter's tray without even looking at me. I watched her walk over to my brother Dante, hooking her arm through his. Dante stood there in a tuxedo my father had paid for, sipping champagne my father had paid for, looking at me with a mixture of pity and annoyance. He did not say a word to defend me. He never did. Courtney rested her head on Dante's shoulder and looked up at my father, batting her eyelashes. "It is just so sad how hard she tries, Dad," Courtney said, addressing my father with a familiarity that always made me grind my teeth. "But you cannot force a connection where there is not one. I mean, just look at them." She gestured between Dante and me as if we were exhibits in a museum. "Look at my husband. He is your spitting image, Elijah. The strong jaw, the dark skin, the broad shoulders. He is a Brooks through and through." Then she turned her cold blue eyes toward me. "And then there is Ebony, with that high yellow skin and those hazel eyes." She let out a sharp, cruel laugh. I mean, seriously, Elijah? Are we sure the mailman was not involved? She does not even look like she belongs in the family photo, let alone at the head table. It is actually embarrassing for you to have her standing here pretending. My father's face darkened. Courtney had struck the exact nerve she knew would trigger him. For 34 years, his insecurity about my complexion had been the weapon he used to hurt my mother, and now this woman was using it to secure her spot in his will. She knew exactly what she was doing. By highlighting my physical differences, she was validating his paranoia. You are right, Courtney. My father grumbled, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me. He looked at Dante with pride, then looked at me with disgust. Dante is my blood. You can see it from a mile away. But her. He waved a hand in my direction. She is just a reminder of Viola's betrayal. Why are you even still here, Ebony? Did you not hear me? I do not want your gift and I do not want your presence. I stood frozen, not because I was hurt, but because I was calculating. I saw the smirk on Courtney's face. This was not just about race or skin color. This was about money. She was terrified that if my father accepted me, she would have to share the inheritance. She was pushing him to cut me off completely. I looked at Dante, waiting for him to speak up to say that we shared a mother, to say something. But he just swirled his drink and looked away. Fine, I said, my voice calm, despite the storm raging inside me. I will take my gift back. But remember this moment, Dad. Remember that you chose the people who spend your money over the only child who could actually help you make it. I turned to leave, but Courtney was not done with me yet. She needed to drive the final nail in the coffin. As the evening wore on, the amber liquid in my father's glass kept disappearing and replacing itself, and with every sip, the veneer of the respectable businessman crumbled away. By 9 o'clock, the polite murmurs of the guests had turned into awkward silence as Elijah Brooks stood on the small stage swaying dangerously near the microphone stand. He was not just drunk on expensive scotch, he was drunk on his own bitterness. He tapped the microphone, sending a screech of feedback through the speakers that made everyone wince, but he did not care. He had an audience, and he wanted to perform the same tragedy he had been rehearsing in our living room for 3 decades. You all think Viola is a saint, do you not? He slurred, leaning heavily on the podium. You send flowers to the nursing home. You say, "Oh, poor Viola, she was such a good wife." He laughed, a harsh barking sound that held no humor. A good wife does not bring home a bastard child and pass it off as mine. The room went deathly still. I stood near the exit, paralyzed not by fear, but by a cold, sharp fury. My mother was lying in a hospital bed 5 miles away, her mind slowly being erased by Alzheimer's disease, and this man was assassinating her character while she could not even remember her own name. Elijah pointed a shaking finger directly at me, like a prosecutor identifying a murderer. Look at her, he bellowed, his voice cracking. Just look at that girl. Does she look like a Brooks to you? Look at my nose. Look at my skin. We are built like tanks. We have history written on our faces. But her, she is delicate. She has got those high cheekbones and that soft hair. He sneered as if my appearance was a personal insult to him. She is too pretty to be my daughter. That is not a compliment coming from him, it was an accusation. That face belongs to some white man my wife was sleeping with behind my back. That is the face of betrayal. I felt the air leave the room. Around me I saw the soft glow of smartphone screens lighting up one by one. The guests, the so-called pillars of the Atlanta community, were not stepping in to stop him. They were hitting record. They were live streaming my humiliation, and my mother is shamed to thousands of people. I could already see the captions forming on social media. The Brooks family breakdown. I wanted to snatch the phones from their hands and smash them, but I knew it was too late. The damage was done. My father had just publicly disowned me based on nothing but his own insecurity and a twisted theory about genetics that he had clung to for 34 years. He looked at me with pure hatred, his eyes bloodshot and watery. You are living proof that she was a liar, Ebony. And every time I look at you, I see him, whoever he was. I turned my head slowly toward the one person who should have had my back. Dante. My little brother. The boy I had tutored in math when he was failing. The boy I had covered for when he wrecked his first car so Dad would not kill him. He was standing there clutching his champagne glass so hard his knuckles were white. His eyes darted around the room nervously checking the reaction of the wealthy guests before finally landing on me. Dante, please. I whispered, my voice trembling for the first time that night. Tell him to stop. You know Mom was faithful. You know this is insane. Tell him. Dante took a slow, deliberate sip of his drink. He looked at Courtney, who gave him a sharp, imperceptible nod, almost like a command. Then he looked at my father, who was panting from his outburst, but looking at Dante with expectation. It was a loyalty test, and Dante was failing it in real time. He took a step away from me, creating a physical distance that felt like a canyon opening up between us. Come on, Ebony, he said, his voice loud enough to be picked up by the nearest smartphone recording us. Do not make this harder than it has to be. Dad is right, you have always been different. Maybe it is time you just accepted it. My stomach dropped. This was the brother whose tuition I had secretly helped pay when Dad cut him off for a semester. This was the brother I had defended 1,000 times. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only I could hear the venom in it. Look, sis, you need to read the room. You should know your place by now. You are an outsider, you always have been. And honestly, we cannot afford to have you taking a slice of the pie anymore. His eyes flickered down to his expensive watch, and I saw a bead of sweat on his forehead. That was when I noticed the tremor in his hand. Dante was not just being cruel. He was desperate. Rumors had been swirling around Atlanta about his underground poker habits, high-stakes games in back rooms. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the terror behind the arrogance. He was in deep. He needed the inheritance. All of it. If I took even a third of the estate, his legs were probably going to get broken by a loan shark. So that was it. He was throwing me to the wolves to save his own skin. He was willing to brand our mother a cheater and me a bastard just to clear his gambling debts. You are pathetic, Dante, I said quietly. You are selling out your own sister for cash. He scoffed loudly, performing for the audience again. I am protecting this family's legacy, Ebony. Something you clearly do not understand because you are not really part of it. Courtney clapped her hands dramatically. Exactly. See, Elijah. Dante is the only one who truly respects this legacy. My father beamed at his son, his chest puffing out with pride, oblivious to the fact that his golden boy was drowning in debt and moral bankruptcy. The betrayal stung worse than my father's words. My father had always hated me, so I expected it. But Dante was the one who actually drew blood. I was alone. Completely and utterly alone. Or so they thought. But they forgot one thing. I made a living finding things people wanted to hide, and I was about to expose every single one of them. The silence that followed Dante's betrayal was thick enough to choke on. But Courtney saw an opportunity, and she pounced on it like a starving animal. She stepped away from my brother and walked toward my father, her heels clicking a rhythmic beat of victory on the marble floor. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow still carried to every corner of the room. Elijah, why are we even debating this? She asked, her eyes gleaming with malice. If you are so sure she is not yours, why do we not just prove it? Science does not lie. Let us get a DNA test. Right now. My father looked up at her through his drunken haze, blinking slowly. A test, he muttered. Yes, Courtney pressed on. A paternity test. If the results show she is not your daughter, she loses everything. No inheritance, no trust fund. She has to legally change her last name and leave the Brooks family registry forever. We can finally cut the dead weight and stop pretending. My father slammed his empty glass down on the table, shattering the crystal stem. Done, he roared. I want it done first thing in the morning. I want it on paper so I can throw it in her face and then throw her out of my house." The room erupted in whispers again. I sat there watching them plan my demise. Most people would have run out of that room crying, but I was not most people. I was a forensic accountant. I dealt in facts, figures, and high-stakes negotiations every single day. I calculated the odds in my head. My mother had sworn on her life she was faithful. I believed her. And if I was right, that meant my father was betting against the truth. I stood up slowly, smoothing out the wrinkles in my dress. The movement drew every eye in the room back to me. I walked until I was standing directly in front of my father and Courtney. I looked my father dead in the eye, ignoring the hatred burning there. "I accept your terms," I said, my voice ice cold. "I will take the test. If I am not your daughter, I will walk away and you will never see me again. I will even pay back every cent you spent on my tuition with interest." Courtney smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "Smart choice, Ebony. At least you know when to fold." "I am not finished." I cut her off sharply. "A bet works two ways, Courtney. If I take this risk, I want a reward. When the test proves that I am his daughter, I want 30% of Brooke's transport." The room gasped. Dante choked on his drink. Courtney's smirk fell off her face. 30% meant controlling interest. It meant I would have the power to fire Dante. It meant I would be their boss. "You are out of your mind," Courtney shrieked. "You get nothing." "I am talking to the owner of the company," I said, keeping my eyes locked on Elijah. "Well, Dad, you are so sure I am an affair child, right? You are so sure Mom was a cheater. So this should be an easy bet for you. Unless you are scared that you have been wrong for 34 years. My father's face turned a deep shade of purple. He stood up, swaying slightly, and leaned into my face until I could smell the scotch on his breath. "You have a deal," he spat. "I will give you 30% because I know I will never have to pay it. You are not mine, Ebony, and soon I will have the paper to prove it." I held out my hand. "Shake on it." In front of all these witnesses, he grabbed my hand, his grip painful and crushing. "Deal." I pulled my hand back and turned to leave. As I walked out into the cool night air, I heard Courtney laughing, telling the guests that they were about to be rich. She had no idea that she had just signed her own death warrant. The game was on. The next morning, the conference room at Henderson and Associates smelled of lemon polish and old money. I sat on one side of the mahogany table, while my father, Courtney, and Dante sat on the other like a firing squad. Mr. Henderson, the family attorney who had known me since I was a child, could not even look me in the eye as he slid the document across the table. He knew this was wrong, but he was being paid too well to have a conscience. Courtney was practically vibrating with excitement. She had clearly spent the entire night awake, not sleeping, but calculating. She reached over and tapped a long, manicured fingernail on the second page of the contract. "Read it carefully, Ebony," she said with a smug grin. "We have itemized everything. If that test proves you are not a Brooks, you are going to reimburse the estate for every cent wasted on you. Private school tuition, summer camps, orthodontics. We even calculated the cost of the food you ate for 18 years. Oh, and the diapers. Do not forget the diapers. We adjusted for inflation." I looked down at the figure. $240,000. They were trying to bankrupt me. My father sat with his arms crossed, staring out the window as if I was already gone. He did not care about the money. He just wanted the erasure of my existence to be total. Dante was scrolling on his phone, refusing to look at the paperwork, probably calculating how fast he could spend his share of my inheritance. Most people would have been insulted, but I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. This was a transaction, and transactions were my language. I picked up my pen and twirled it between my fingers. "This looks comprehensive," I said, keeping my voice flat. "But there is one standard clause missing." Courtney let out an exasperated sigh. "What now? Do you want a payment plan? Because we are not a bank." "No," I said, leaning forward and locking eyes with her. "I want an anti-fraud clause. I want it written here that if the DNA results are tampered with, altered, or influenced by any outside party, the person responsible forfeits their entire personal estate to the victim." The room went dead silent. Courtney shifted in her seat, her eyes darting to Dante. "Why would we need that?" she snapped. "Unless you are planning to switch the samples yourself." I smiled a sharp, professional smile that did not reach my eyes. "If you are confident in the truth, Courtney, you have nothing to worry about. This only punishes liars. Unless you think someone in this room might try to rig the test to make sure I lose." My father turned from the window, his face was hard. "Put it in," he ordered the lawyer. "I have nothing to hide. I want this ironclad so she has no wiggle room when the truth comes out." Courtney looked like she wanted to argue, but she could not do it without looking guilty. She swallowed hard and nodded. Mr. Henderson typed the addendum and printed a fresh copy. The printer whirred in the silence, sounding like a countdown. When the paper landed in front of me, I did not hesitate. I signed my name with a flourish, the ink dark and permanent. Courtney snatched the paper away as soon as I was done, staring at my signature like it was a winning lottery ticket. She thought she had just secured her fortune. She had no idea that by forcing this contract, she had just handed me the weapon I would eventually use to destroy her. The trap was set, and she had walked right into it. The days leading up to the DNA test were a blur of cold anxiety. I sat in my penthouse apartment looking out over the Atlanta skyline, trying to focus on a forensic audit for a tech firm, but the numbers kept swimming on the screen. My hand drifted to the scar on my left elbow. It was faint now, a thin white line against my skin, but touching it brought the memory rushing back with the force of a physical blow. I was 10 years old again, standing on the front porch of the family estate, shivering in a soaking wet dress. It had been a Tuesday afternoon. I had been playing in the yard with Dante. He had thrown his favorite action figure into the bushes, and when I could not find it, he started screaming. My father stormed out of the house, his face twisted in that familiar rage he reserved only for me. "You lost his toy!" he shouted, grabbing my arm so hard his fingers left bruises. "You are useless, just like your mother." He dragged me to the front door and shoved me outside, locking the deadbolt with a final click that sounded like a gunshot. I remembered pounding on the heavy oak door until my knuckles bled. "Dad, please let me in." I sobbed, the rain mixing with my tears. "It is cold. Please." Through the window, I could see my mother standing in the kitchen. She was crying, her hands covering her mouth, but she did not move toward the door. She looked at my father, then back at me, and then she turned away. That was the moment I learned that love in the Brooks household was conditional, and I did not meet the conditions. I stayed on that porch for 3 hours until the sun went down. When my father finally opened the door, he did not apologize. He just looked at me with cold indifference and told me to clean up the mud I had tracked onto the slate tiles. That night, I lay in bed shivering uncontrollably, vowing that one day I would build a house that no one could ever lock me out of. Back in the present, I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and pressed my hand against the cool glass. I had kept that vow. I owned this apartment. I owned my car. I owned my career. But the little girl inside me was still standing on that porch, wet and cold, waiting for a father who would never come. The difference was that now I was not asking to be let in. I was preparing to burn the house down. The chime of my phone broke the silence. It was a notification from the clinic. The appointment was confirmed for tomorrow morning. I stared at the screen, feeling a strange mixture of dread and anticipation. My father thought this test would be his victory lap. He thought it would finally prove that I was the mistake he always claimed I was. But as I looked at my reflection in the dark window, I realized something he did not. Mistakes do not survive the way I had. Mistakes do not rise from the mud to build empires. I was not a mistake. I was a reckoning. And tomorrow morning the reckoning was finally coming home. The smell of Serenity Gardens was a mix of lavender air freshener and decay, masked by industrial strength cleaner. I walked down the hallway, counting the tiles to keep my heart rate down. My father paid for the private suite, but he rarely visited. To him, my mother Viola was just another broken asset, something that had lost its value once her mind started to drift away into the fog of early-onset Alzheimer's disease. I pushed open the heavy door and found her sitting by the window, staring at a bird feeder that was empty. "Mom," I whispered, closing the door behind me. She turned slowly. Her eyes, once sharp and full of laughter, were now milky and distant. For a second, she just stared at me like I was a stranger delivering her lunch. Then a flicker of recognition passed over her face. "Ebony," she croaked, her voice unused and raspy. "You came." I pulled the metal chair close to her bed and took her frail hand in mine. Her skin felt like paper-thin parchment. I needed to be gentle, but time was running out. The DNA test was less than 24 hours away. I needed the truth, not for the lawyers, but for myself. I needed to know if the man who raised me had a reason to hate me, or if he was just a monster. "Mom, I need you to focus," I said, squeezing her hand slightly. "I need you to tell me the truth about Dad, about when I was born." She blinked rapidly, her brow furrowing in confusion. "Elijah," she muttered. "Elijah is angry, always angry." "Yes, he is angry, Mom. He says I am not his. He says you met someone else." I watched her face closely, searching for a flinch, a look of guilt, anything. But she just stared at my hand, tracing the lines on my palm with her trembling finger. The silence stretched out, becoming heavy and suffocating. I felt a lump form in my throat. If she did not deny it, then it had to be true. My entire life I had defended her honor. I had told myself that Dad was paranoid, that he was projecting his own insecurities onto her. But what if he was right? Suddenly her grip on my hand tightened. It was shocking how much strength she still had. She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine with a terrifying intensity. "I am sorry," she whispered. My heart stopped. "Sorry for what, Mom?" "I had to," she said, tears pooling in her eyes. "I had to do it, Ebony. He would have killed me. He would have been so broken. I am so sorry." The air left my lungs. There it was, the confession. She was apologizing for the affair. She was apologizing for bringing a child into a home where she knew it would not be welcomed. She was admitting that my existence was a lie she told to save her marriage. I pulled my hand away, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. I stood up, backing away from the woman I had idolized my whole life. She was not the victim I thought she was. She was the architect of my misery. She had let me live in a war zone for 34 years to cover her own tracks. "Rest now, Mom," I said, my voice trembling. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her crying softly by the window. I walked to my car in a daze. I was going to lose the bet. I was going to lose the inheritance. But worse than that, I had just lost the last person in the world I thought I could trust. I was truly alone now, or so I thought. I had no idea that her apology was not about an affair. It was about a secret much darker and much more dangerous than infidelity. The next morning, I walked into the glass-walled lobby of my accounting firm expecting silence, but instead I was met with whispers. My assistant Sarah, usually cheerful, refused to make eye contact with me. When I reached my desk, there was a memo from Human Resources waiting on my keyboard marked urgent. I did not need to guess who was behind it. Courtney had not been content with waiting for the test results. She had decided to scorch the earth beneath my feet beforehand. I marched into the HR director's office. He looked uncomfortable, sliding a stack of printed emails across the desk. "We received these anonymous tips this morning, Ebony," he said. "They claim you falsified your identity on your background check and that you are currently being sued by your own father for inheritance fraud. They also suggest you might be embezzling client funds to pay for legal fees." The emails were sent from a burner account, but the syntax was unmistakable. It was Courtney. She was trying to get me fired so I would lose the resources to fight them. I assured my boss that the allegations were baseless and part of a domestic dispute. Because I was their top earner, they believed me, but the damage to my reputation was done. I walked back to my office and closed the blinds. Courtney wanted a war, she was going to get one. But she forgot one crucial detail. I was a forensic accountant. I did not just look at money, I tracked it, hunted it, and weaponized it. I opened my laptop and logged into a public records database. If Courtney was trying to destroy my livelihood, I was going to take a look at hers. She acted like the queen of Atlanta society, but I knew my brother Dante was broke, which meant Courtney was spending money she did not have. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the cracks in her facade. Courtney had 5 credit cards maxed out to the limit. Neiman Marcus Saks Fifth Avenue and a platinum visa that was 60 days past due. Her debt-to-income ratio was a disaster. She was floating on minimum payments waiting for my father's inheritance to bail her out. I picked up the phone and called a contact I had at a debt collection agency. "I want to buy a debt portfolio," I said, keeping my voice low. Specifically the outstanding unsecured debt of Courtney Brooks. Since it was considered toxic debt, I bought it for pennies on the dollar. By noon, I was no longer just her sister-in-law. I was her creditor. I drafted a legal notice immediately. It was not a polite request for payment. It was a demand for the full balance of $82,000 payable within 48 hours, or I would file for an immediate freeze on her personal assets, including the luxury SUV she loved so much. I sent it via courier to my father's estate, requiring a signature. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was Courtney. I let it go to voicemail. Then she texted, "You cannot do this." I typed back a single message. "You tried to take my job, so I took your credit score. Pay up or start walking." She had tried to humiliate me at work, but I had just brought the reality of her financial ruin right to her doorstep. She thought she was hunting a rabbit, but she had just stepped on a landmine. The Genesis Institute was located in the most expensive medical district of Atlanta, a building of steel and glass that looked more like a fortress than a clinic. Inside, the air was filtered and freezing cold, smelling of antiseptic and money. I arrived 15 minutes early, sitting in a leather chair that cost more than my first car, keeping my hands folded in my lap to stop them from shaking. This was it, the point of no return. The automatic doors slid open and my family entered like a funeral procession. My father walked in first, his face set in a mask of grim determination. Behind him, a private nurse pushed my mother in her wheelchair. Viola looked small and fragile, wrapped in a cashmere shawl, her eyes darting around the sterile lobby in confusion. Bringing up the rear was Courtney. She was not just walking, she was patrolling, scanning the room as if expecting to find me swapping out vials of blood in the waiting area. When the head nurse called my name, Courtney practically sprinted to the reception desk. "Hold on," she snapped, her voice echoing in the quiet room. "I want to observe the collection process." The nurse, a woman with patience etched into her forehead, shook her head politely. "I am sorry, ma'am, but family members are not allowed in the collection room due to sterility protocols." "I do not care about your protocols," Courtney hissed, pointing a finger at me. "That woman is a professional fraudster. If I do not watch that swab go from her mouth into the sealed tube, she will find a way to switch it. We have millions of dollars on the line here, and I am not letting her sleight of hand cheat my husband out of his birthright." My father stepped forward, placing a heavy hand on the counter. "Let her in," he commanded. "If you want my money, you will let my daughter-in-law supervise. I do not trust the girl either." The nurse looked at me. I simply shrugged. "Let her watch," I said calmly. "Let her see exactly who I am." We filed into the examination room. It was small and white. I went first. I opened my mouth and let the nurse scrape the inside of my cheek. Courtney stood 2 feet away, watching with the intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse. She tracked the swab as it went into the tube and watched the nurse apply the barcode. Next was my father. He glared at me the entire time the swab was in his mouth, as if he could expel me from his genetics through sheer force of will. Finally, it was my mother's turn. She was frightened by the nurse represent's gloves and tried to turn her head away. "It is okay, Mom," I said, stepping forward instinctively. Do not touch her, Courtney barked, stepping in front of me. Do not let her near Viola. She might try to contaminate the sample. I froze, my hands curling into fists. I watched as the nurse gently coaxed my mother into opening her mouth. When the swab was secured and sealed in the evidence bag, the tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate us. The nurse placed all 3 tubes in a biohazard box and locked it with a loud click. Results will be expedited, the nurse said. You will hear from us in 48 hours. We walked out of the clinic in silence. The sun outside was blindingly bright, a stark contrast to the Cold War we had just left behind. My father refused to look at me as he got into his limousine. Courtney gave me one last smirk, a look that said, "Pack your bags." They thought the test was the end of me. They had no idea it was the beginning of the end for them. The week of waiting felt like a slow suffocation. But the morning of the revelation finally arrived. We gathered back in the conference room at Henderson and Associates. The atmosphere was less like a legal meeting and more like a twisted coronation. My father had actually brought a chilled bottle of Dom Perignon and a set of crystal flutes, placing them in the center of the table as if to say the celebration was a foregone conclusion. He sat at the head of the table, drumming his fingers on the mahogany wood with a rhythm that screamed impatience. Courtney sat to his right, looking like a cat that had already swallowed the canary and was just waiting to digest it. Mr. Henderson walked in precisely at 9 o'clock. He looked terrible. His skin was pale, and he was sweating despite the aggressive air conditioning. He held a large white envelope in his hands, gripping it so tightly that the edges were crinkled. He did not look at me. He did not look at my father. He looked like a man who was about to defuse a bomb and was not sure which wire to cut. He sat down and placed the envelope in the center of the table next to the champagne. "Open it," my father commanded, not even bothering with a greeting. "I want to drink to my freedom from this charade." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Brooks, these results are complex. Perhaps we should discuss them privately before open the damn envelope, Henderson," my father shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Everyone jumped except me. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap, preparing myself for the blow I knew was coming. With shaking hands, the lawyer slid a letter opener under the flap and sliced the paper. The sound was sharp and loud in the silent room. He pulled out a document with the logo of the Genesis Institute at the top. He took a deep breath, adjusting his glasses. We tested the genetic markers of Elijah Brooks against the subject. Ebony Brooks, to determine biological paternity. He read, his voice trembling slightly. The results indicate that the probability of paternity is 0%. The silence held for exactly 1 second before it was shattered by my father's laughter. It was a loud, booming sound that lacked any warmth. He threw his head back, clapping his hands together in a display of triumphant cruelty. "I knew it," he roared, standing up and pointing a finger directly at my face. "I told you. For 34 years I told everyone who would listen. You are not a Brooks. You are nothing to me." Courtney let out a squeal of delight, grabbing Dante's arm. "We won. Oh my God, we actually won." My father grabbed the champagne bottle and popped the cork, the foam spilling over onto the legal documents. He did not care. He poured a glass and raised it toward me, his eyes shining with malice. "Here is to the truth, Ebony, or whatever your name is. You are a bastard, a fraud, and now you are legally nothing. Get out of my sight. Get out of my life. You owe me tuition. You owe me for the food you ate. I want you ruined." I watched him celebrate my erasure. He looked so happy, so vindicated. He thought the game was over. He thought he had just won the jackpot. He had no idea that the piece of paper Mr. Henderson was still holding contained a second paragraph. A paragraph that would turn his victory into a nightmare. I remained seated, my expression unreadable. "Are you deaf?" my father sneered. I said, "Get out. You lost the bet." "Sit down, Elijah," I said, my voice cutting through his celebration like a razor. "Mr. Henderson is not finished reading." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat loudly, cutting through my father's tirade like a knife. "Mr. Brooks, please sit down," he said, his voice trembling but firm. My father stopped mid-laugh, the champagne glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at the lawyer with annoyance, as if he were a servant speaking out of turn. Why, he demanded, his eyes narrowing. I have the proof right here. She is out. Done. The case is closed. Henderson looked down at the second page of the document, his knuckles white as he gripped the paper. We ran a maternity test as well, sir. It is standard procedure for inheritance disputes of this magnitude to confirm lineage on both sides. My father waved his hand dismissively, spilling a few drops of expensive champagne on the polished table. That was a complete waste of my money, Henderson. We know she came out of Viola. I was there at the hospital. I paid the bill. I saw her hold the baby. Just give me the paper so I can frame it. Henderson did not move. He did not hand over the paper. Instead, he looked up and met my father's eyes with a look of terrified seriousness. I need you to listen to me, Elijah. The results for the maternity test are unexpected. Courtney rolled her eyes, letting out a loud sigh of exasperation. Oh, for God's sake, just read it so we can kick her out. She turned to me, her smile wide and predatory. Do not get your hopes up, Ebony. Just because your mom is a cheater does not mean... Henderson cut her off, his voice raising an octave. We tested the genetic markers of Viola Brooks against the subject Ebony Brooks. The probability of maternity is 0%. The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. The smirk on Courtney's face did not just fade, it evaporated, leaving behind a look of pure confusion. She looked from the lawyer to me, and then to my father, searching for a punchline, but there was none. My father froze. The champagne glass slipped from his fingers and hit the table, not breaking, but rolling on its side, spilling golden liquid across the mahogany surface like a river. He stared at the lawyer, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out. 0%, he whispered finally, his voice barely audible. That is impossible. Viola gave birth to her. I drove her to St. Jude Hospital myself. I saw the nurses take her in. I saw the baby in her arms. Henderson shook his head slowly, pushing the paper across the wet table. Science does not lie, Elijah. Ebony is not biologically related to Viola Brooks. She is not related to either of you. I sat there feeling the blood drain from my face. I had prepared myself to lose my father today. I had made peace with the idea that my mother had an affair. But this was not an affair. If I was not my mother's child, and I was not my father's child, then who was I? The narrative of the cheating wife was dead, but in its place, something far more terrifying had just been born. The room was deathly quiet. No one was recording anymore. No one was laughing. We were all staring at that piece of paper as if it were a bomb that had just detonated, and we were waiting for the smoke to clear to see who was still left standing. My father looked at me, and for the first time in 34 years, I did not see hatred in his eyes. I saw fear. My father looked like a man trying to read a map in a language he did not speak. For 3 decades, he had built his entire identity around the role of the victimized husband. He had justified every cruel word, every missed birthday, and every locked door with the certainty that my mother had stepped out on him. But now that certainty had just evaporated, leaving him standing on the edge of a cliff with no ground beneath his feet. If she is not yours, and she is not mine, he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at me, then who the hell is she? He spun around to face my mother, who was sitting in her wheelchair, humming a soft tune, completely detached from the chaos around her. He grabbed the armrests of her chair, leaning down until his face was inches from hers. The vein in his forehead pulsed dangerously. Answer me, Viola, he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. Who is this girl? Where did you get her? Did you buy her? Did you steal her? You let me believe she was an affair baby for 34 years. You let me hate her because I thought she was proof of your infidelity. But this is worse. You brought a stranger into my house. My mother flinched, retreating into her shawl like a frightened turtle. Elijah, she whispered, her eyes wide and wet. The baby. I just wanted the baby. What baby? My father roared. We had a baby. You went to the hospital pregnant. You came home with a baby. What did you do with our child Viola? Did our baby die? Did you swap them? Courtney stood in the corner, her mouth hanging open. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Her entire strategy had relied on proving I was illegitimate. She had never calculated for the possibility that I was a complete anomaly. If I was not related to anyone, then I was not just disinherited, I was a ghost. I was a legal question mark. I sat there watching the man who raised me unravel. I should have felt relieved. The stigma of being the affair child was gone, but a cold hollowness replaced it. If I was not related to Viola, then who was I? Where did I come from? The woman I had loved and cared for, the woman whose hand I held through chemo and memory loss, was not my mother. Elijah, please, the nurse interjected, trying to step between them. You are upsetting her. Her blood pressure is spiking. I do not care about her blood pressure, my father yelled, shoving the nurse aside. I care about the fact that I have been feeding, clothing, and educating a random girl for half a lifetime. He turned back to me, his eyes wild. And you must have known. You and her were always thick as thieves. Did she tell you? Did you two laugh about it behind my back? I did not know, I said, my voice quiet, but steady. I found out 10 minutes ago, just like you. But unlike you, I am not worried about the money, Elijah. I am worried about the truth. My father ran a hand over his face, pacing the length of the room like a caged tiger. He kicked a chair, sending it skidding across the floor. This is a nightmare, he muttered. A complete nightmare. I raised a stranger. I gave my name to a stranger. He stopped pacing and looked at my mother with a look of pure disgust. A look that was somehow worse than the hatred he had shown me. You are not just a cheater, Viola, he spat. You are a liar of the worst kind. And I am going to find out exactly what you did, even if I have to tear that hospital apart brick by brick. He grabbed his coat and stormed toward the door. We are going to St. Jude, he commanded, right now. And she is coming with us. He pointed at me. If you want to know who you really are, you better get in the car. Because I am not stopping until I find out whose blood is running through your veins. While my father raged, and Courtney looked like she was trying to calculate if she could still sue a ghost, I went into professional mode. I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in emotions, I deal in discrepancies. When the numbers on a balance sheet do not add up, it is never an accident. It is always a cover-up. And this was the biggest discrepancy of my life. I sat back in my chair and let the noise of my family wash over me. My father was screaming about lawsuits. Courtney was frantically texting, probably her divorce lawyer. But I was looking at the timeline in my head. October 14th, 1990. St. Jude Hospital. My father claimed he drove my mother there. He claimed he brought us home. If I was not Viola's biological child, there were only two possibilities. One, she knowingly adopted me and lied about it, which seemed unlikely given her terrified reaction. Or two, she went into that hospital with one baby and came out with another. I looked at my mother, still trembling in her wheelchair. She was not a mastermind. She was a woman who had been broken by fear. She would not have the capacity to orchestrate a complex adoption fraud. That meant the error happened at the source. Stop screaming, I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a gavel. Everyone stopped and looked at me. My father was panting, his tie crooked. Dad, sit down, I ordered. I am not asking you as your daughter. I am asking you as the person who is about to solve this mess for you. You said you drove Mom to St. Jude. Was she in labor? Yes, he snapped, wiping sweat from his forehead. Her water broke in the kitchen. And you saw the baby come out? No, he grumbled. It was 1990. They had a waiting room for fathers. Dr. Evans told me there were complications, and I had to wait outside. I waited for 4 hours. Then a nurse brought you out wrapped in a pink blanket. She said Viola was resting, but the baby was healthy. I leaned forward. Did you see the birth certificate? Of course I did. It has my name on it. Does it have a footprint? I asked. He paused. Yes. I pulled out my phone and logged into the Georgia State Archives. I had access through my work. I pulled up the birth records for that day. St. Jude Hospital, October 14th. There were 12 births that day, but only one death recorded in the neonatal unit. I looked up at them. This was not an affair, Dad, and Mom did not buy me on the black market. I think something happened in that delivery room. Something that Dr. Evans and that nurse wanted to hide. Courtney scoffed. Oh, please, now you are writing a conspiracy theory. You were probably just switched with another baby by accident. Accidents happen in chaos, Courtney, I said coldly. But deception happens in secret. Mom apologized to me at the nursing home. She said she had to do it. She knew. Someone made her take me, or someone made her believe I was the only option she had. I stood up and grabbed my purse. We are going to the hospital. The archives are in the basement. If there was a switch or a theft, the paper trail will be there. You can stay here and cry about your legacy, Elijah, or you can come with me and find out who I actually am. My father stared at me. For the first time, he did not see a rebellious child. He saw a partner. He grabbed his keys. Drive, he said. We are going to dig up the past. The sky outside Henderson and Associates had turned a bruised shade of purple, mirroring the storm brewing inside the Lincoln Navigator. My father insisted on driving despite his trembling hands, and Courtney scrambled into the back seat, refusing to let us out of her sight. She claimed she was there to protect the family assets, but I knew she was terrified that I might cut a deal with my father in private. We were three enemies trapped in a leather-lined cage, hurtling down the highway toward the place where all our lives had begun. Rain lashed against the windshield in violent sheets, blurring the world outside into gray streaks. The silence in the car was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of the wipers and the sound of my father's heavy breathing. He gripped the steering wheel so tight the leather creaked. You know this does not change the contract, Courtney said, her voice shrill from the back seat. She was leaning forward between the front seats, her perfume cloying in the recycled air. The DNA test proved you are not a Brooks Ebony. That means the clause stands. You still owe the estate for every penny spent on you. In fact, since you are a complete stranger, maybe we should charge you interest for room and board. I looked at her in the rearview mirror. Her desperation was pathetic. You are really worried about tuition money right now, Courtney. We just found out I might have been kidnapped or switched at birth, and you are calculating rent. You are a ghoul. I am a realist, she snapped. Elijah, tell her. Tell her she is still out of the will. My father swerved to avoid a hydroplaning truck, causing Courtney to shriek. He slammed his hand on the dashboard. Will you shut up? He roared. His voice filled the small space, making the windows rattle. Do you think I care about the money right now? I raised a stranger. Do you understand that? I looked into a stranger's eyes for 34 years. I need to know who she is. I need to know what Viola did. He looked over at me, and for a second his eyes were not filled with hate, but with a terrifying confusion. He looked like a man waking up from a coma. You have her eyes, he whispered. I always thought you had the mailman's eyes, but you do not. You have someone else's eyes. Who are you, Ebony? I looked out the window at the passing trees. I do not know, Dad, I said quietly, but we are going to find out. The car hit a pothole, jarring us all. We were approaching the old district of Atlanta where St. Jude Hospital stood. It was no longer a functioning hospital. It had been converted into a long-term care facility for the indigent years ago, but the records basement was still federal property. The building loomed out of the rain like a haunted house, its brick facade dark and foreboding. My father parked the car at a crooked angle near the entrance. He killed the engine but didn't open the door immediately. The rain hammered on the roof like bullets. If Viola stole you, he said, his voice low and dangerous, I will leave her in that nursing home to rot. And if someone stole you from someone else, then God help us all. Courtney opened her door, letting a gust of wind and rain into the car. Well, let us get this over with, she grumbled, holding her expensive purse over her head. I want to see the proof before you two cook up a story to cut Dante out. We stepped out into the storm, the three of us united by nothing but a mystery that was about to destroy whatever was left of our family. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked toward the peeling doors of the hospital, ready to tear the truth out of the walls. St. Jude Hospital was a rotting carcass of a building looming against the stormy sky like a bad memory. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had turned gray with rot, and the chain-link fence surrounding the perimeter was rusted through in places. It looked nothing like a place where life began. It looked like a place where secrets went to die. We stood at the service entrance soaking wet in our formal wear, looking like ghosts who had taken a wrong turn on the way to a funeral. A security guard sat in a small booth near the gate, watching a portable television. He was an older man with tired eyes and a uniform that had seen better days. When he saw three people in tuxedos and evening gowns standing in the mud, he did not even blink. He just slid the glass window open a crack, letting the smell of stale cigarette smoke mix with the rain. Closed, he grunted, reaching for his thermos. Private property. No trespassing. My father did not speak. He simply reached into his tuxedo jacket and pulled out a gold money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills, his hands shaking slightly from a mixture of cold and adrenaline. He shoved the wet cash through the crack in the window. "We need to access the archives," my father said, his voice rough. 1990. "We will be in and out in an hour." The guard looked at the money, then at the Lincoln Navigator parked crookedly on the curb. He buzzed the gate open without asking another question. Money was the only language that still worked in this part of town. We walked through the heavy steel doors and into the main hallway. The air inside was colder than the storm outside. It smelled of mildew-wet drywall and abandonment. Our footsteps echoed loudly on the linoleum floor, kicking up clouds of dust that danced in the beams of our phone flashlights. Courtney was hyperventilating, holding a scented handkerchief over her nose to block out the stench. "This is disgusting," she whined, her voice trembling. "My Louboutins are ruined. Elijah, we should just hire a private investigator to do this. We could catch a disease down here." "Keep moving," my father growled, not even looking back at her. He was marching forward with a singular obsession, his expensive dress shoes crunching over broken glass and fallen ceiling tiles. He led us toward the elevators, but they were dead, so we took the stairs down into the bowels of the building. The basement was a labyrinth of rusted metal shelves that stretched on into the darkness. This was the medical records department, or what was left of it. Thousands of manila folders were stacked in chaotic piles, some spilling onto the damp floor. Water dripped from a pipe somewhere in the distance, creating a rhythmic plinking sound that felt like a ticking clock. "This is a needle in a haystack," Courtney said, looking around with wide, fearful eyes. "We will never find it. The filing system is gone. Start looking," I ordered, stepping forward and taking charge. "Look for the year 1990. Look for October. The boxes should be chronological, even if they fell off the shelves." We spread out into the gloom, three people who hated each other, forced to work together in the dark. I ran my flashlight beam over the dusty labels, my heart pounding in my chest. Somewhere in this damp tomb lay the piece of paper that would tell me why I existed. And I was not leaving until I found it. The basement of St. Jude was a graveyard of paper. We spent 20 minutes pulling damp boxes from the shelves, our hands turning black with dust and grime. My father worked in a frenzy, tearing through the cardboard like a man possessed, while Courtney stood near the door holding her phone up, trying to find a signal. I moved methodically, scanning the labels with my flashlight. 1988, 1989, and then finally 1990. I found the box tucked away in a bottom corner behind a stack of old medical journals. It was marked Maternity October 1990 in faded red marker. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled it out. The cardboard was soft with moisture, but the files inside were wrapped in plastic. "I found it," I said, my voice echoing in the dark cavern. My father was at my side in an instant. "Open it," he commanded, breathless. "Find October 14th. I sat on a crate and peeled back the plastic. The files were alphabetized. I flipped past Adams and Baker until I landed on Brooks. Viola Brooks, room 302, admitted at 4 a.m. Here it is, I whispered. My hands were shaking as I opened the manila folder. The first page was the admission form with my father's signature at the bottom. I saw his handwriting strong and confident, authorizing the hospital to treat his wife. But when I turned the page to look for the delivery notes and the infant identification form, my stomach dropped. The pages were gone. They had not fallen out. They had not rotted away. I ran my finger along the spine of the folder. There was a jagged edge where paper had been violently ripped out. Someone had purged the record. "It is empty," I said, holding the folder up to the light. "The birth certificate, the footprints, the doctor's notes, they are all gone." My father snatched the folder from my hands, staring at the empty space with disbelief. "This is impossible," he muttered. "Who would do this? Who would come down here and tear out the record of a baby's birth?" Courtney stepped forward, looking over his shoulder. "Well, that settles it," she said with a shrug. "It is a dead end. We should just go home. Clearly, whatever happened was meant to stay buried." "No," I said, standing up. "You do not destroy evidence unless there is a crime to hide. If I was just a mistake or an affair baby, nobody would care enough to break into an abandoned hospital to scrub the file. This proves that my birth wasn't just a secret. It was a cover-up." I took the folder back from my father and shone my light on the inside back cover. There was a small index card stapled there listing the staff on duty that night. Most of the names were faded, but one was written in bold ink at the top of the shift list. Head nurse, Hattie May. "I know that name," my father said, his eyes narrowing. "She was the one who brought you out to me. She was the one who told me I could not go into the delivery room." "Then she is the key," I said, snapping a picture of the card. "If she was the head nurse, she signed off on everything. And if she is still alive, she is the only person left who knows why those pages are missing. We are not going home, Courtney. We are going to find Hattie May. Finding a ghost is easy if you know which digital gravestones to look under." While my father paced around the damp basement of St. Jude, cursing the empty file folder, I turned my phone into a command center. I logged into a skip tracing database that I usually use to track down executives fleeing with company assets. Hattie Mae Williams, age 82, no active credit cards, no mortgage history, no social media footprint. She was living in the shadow economy, a place where people go when they want to be forgotten. It took me 7 minutes to find a match. A utility bill for a small apartment in a government-subsidized housing complex called the Towers on the south side of the city. It was less than 10 miles away, but in Atlanta, 10 miles can be the difference between a mansion and a war zone. "We have an address," I said, pocketing my phone. "Get in the car." The drive was a descent into a different world. As the Lincoln Navigator glided past the manicured lawns of Buckhead and into the cracked pavement of the Bluffs, Courtney locked her door. The streets here were lined with boarded-up storefronts and flickering streetlights that buzzed like dying insects. We parked in front of the Towers, a concrete monolith that looked more like a prison than a home. "You cannot be serious," Courtney hissed, clutching her designer bag to her chest. "She lives here." "Elijah, we are going to get carjacked. We should call the police and have them bring her to us. The police need a warrant, Courtney," I said, opening the door. "We have cash and desperation. Move." We bypassed the lobby, which smelled of bleach and stale urine, and took the stairs to the 4th floor because the elevator was out of order. My father was breathing heavily, his expensive Italian loafers slipping on the dirty concrete steps. He looked out of place, a king wandering through the ruins of a kingdom he had ignored. Apartment 4B was at the end of a long, dim hallway. The door was peeling paint, revealing layers of green and beige underneath. There was no welcome mat, just a heavy steel security gate. I could hear the faint sound of a television inside. A game show. The Wheel of Fortune spinning. I knocked on the metal frame. The sound was sharp and aggressive. "Hattie Mae Williams," I called out. The television volume instantly cut off. Silence. I knocked again, harder this time. "We know you are in there, Hattie. My name is Ebony. I was born at St. Jude Hospital on October 14th, 1990. We found the file. We saw your name." I heard the shuffle of slippers on linoleum. Then the sound of a deadbolt sliding into place. Not unlocking, but locking. She was fortifying herself. "Go away," a voice trembled from behind the door. It was old and brittle like dry leaves. "I do not know you. I do not know any Ebony. You ripped the pages out." "Hattie," my father boomed, his voice echoing in the hallway. He stepped in front of me, losing his patience. "I am Elijah Brooks. You remember me. You told me I could not see my wife. Open this door before I kick it down." "You are dead," the voice shrieked from inside. "You are all supposed to be dead. Go away. The devil is not welcome here." She was terrified, but her words sent a chill down my spine. She did not say she didn't remember. She said we were supposed to be dead. That meant she knew exactly who we were, and she had been living in fear of this knock for 34 years. I put a hand on my father's chest, pushing him back. Anger would not work here. Fear was the lock, and only the truth could be the key. I leaned my forehead against the cold metal door. "Hattie, listen to me," I said, softening my voice. "We are not dead. But the lies are. I am not here to hurt you. I just want to know whose blood is inside me. Please, just open the door." The deadbolt slid back with a grinding sound that echoed in the concrete hallway like a casket closing. The door cracked open 3 inches, held fast by a rusted security chain. Through the gap I saw a slice of a face. Wrinkled dark skin, one cloudy eye, and hair hidden beneath a silk bonnet. The eye darted from me to Courtney, and then it landed on my father. The recognition was instant and terrifying. The old woman did not ask who we were. She gasped a sound like air escaping a tire and immediately tried to slam the door shut. "Lord Jesus, have mercy," she shrieked, throwing her weight against the wood. My father was too slow, but I was ready. I jammed the toe of my leather boot into the gap just before the door could close. The metal edge bit into my ankle bone, sending a jolt of pain up my leg, but I did not flinch. I planted my shoulder against the door, using every ounce of my strength to keep it from sealing us out. "Open the door, Hattie," I gritted out through clenched teeth. "Go away," the voice from inside wailed. "You are ghosts. You are not supposed to be here. The pact was sealed. Go away before you bring the devil down on us all." My father threw his shoulder against the door next to mine. "Open it!" he roared, his voice booming in the narrow space. "I am Elijah Brooks. You know who I am. You took my money that night. Now you are going to give me the truth." Courtney stood back near the stairwell, clutching her purse, looking at the peeling paint with disgust. "Just kick it down, Elijah," she hissed. "She is 80 years old. She cannot stop you." I ignored Courtney and focused on the sliver of face visible through the crack. Hattie was pushing with surprising strength, fueled by pure panic. I could hear her praying, mumbling scripture under her breath in a frantic rhythm. "Hattie, stop," I said, keeping my voice low and intense. "Look at me. Stop looking at him and look at me." The pressure on the door eased slightly. The cloudy eye shifted to meet mine. I stared right back, letting the hallway light illuminate my face. My hazel eyes, the skin tone that had been the source of my family, is misery for 3 decades. "Do you know who I am, Hattie?" I asked. She stopped pushing, her breath hitched in her throat. "I am the baby from room 302, I said. "I am the girl you handed to Viola Brooks on October 14th, 1990. I am the reason you tore those pages out of the file." The chain rattled as her hand trembled against the doorframe. "You grew up," she whispered. Her voice was filled with a mixture of wonder and horror. "You actually grew up." "I did," I said. "But I grew up in a war zone because of what you did. My father hates me. My mother is dying with a secret that is eating her alive. And I do not know who I am. You are the only one who knows Hattie. You are the only one left. The door went slack. She stepped back and I heard the sound of the chain sliding out of its track. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dimly lit apartment that smelled of old incense and regret. Hattie Mae Williams stood in the center of the room, clutching a rosary to her chest, looking like a woman waiting for the executioner. "Come in," she whispered. "I knew this day would come. I just prayed I would be dead before it did." The small apartment smelled of mothballs and fear. Hattie Mae shuffled backward until her legs hit the edge of a worn floral sofa, and she collapsed onto it, clutching her rosary so tight her knuckles looked like polished mahogany. She refused to look at my father, who was looming in the doorway like a thundercloud. Instead, she stared at a spot on the carpet, shaking her head rapidly. "I did not do anything," she mumbled, her voice rising in pitch. "I am just a retired nurse. I took care of babies. That is all. I do not know about missing pages. I do not know about stolen children. You people need to leave. You are confusing me." She was retreating. The wall of denial was going back up brick by brick. I stepped forward, ready to use the gentle approach again to coax the truth out of her like a splinter. But Courtney had run out of patience. She pushed past me, her high heels snagging on the frayed carpet, and pointed a manicured finger directly in the old woman's face. "Oh, cut the act, you old witch," Courtney snapped. "We know exactly what you did. You kidnapped a baby. That is a federal crime. Do you know what happens to baby snatchers in prison? They do not last a week." Hattie let out a strangled cry, pressing her back against the sofa cushions. "Prison," she gasped. "No. No police." He said no police. Courtney sneered, leaning closer. "Well, guess what? We are calling them right now. And unless you want to spend your last few years in a cage, you better start talking. Tell us who paid you. Tell us where the real baby is." "You are making it worse," I shouted, grabbing Courtney by the arm. But the damage was done. Hattie was hyperventilating, rocking back and forth and muttering about Judgment Day. She was shutting down, completely terrified into silence by Courtney's stupidity. If she had a stroke or a heart attack right now, the secret would die with her. I spun Courtney around, gripping her shoulders hard enough to wrinkle her expensive silk blouse. "Get out," I hissed. "Excuse me," Courtney sputtered, blinking in shock. "I am helping. She needs to be scared." "You are an idiot," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You are terrifying the only witness we have. She is not going to talk to a cop. She's going to lawyer up and plead the fifth. Get out of this apartment. Go wait in the car." "I am not going anywhere," Courtney argued, trying to shake me off. "I represent the estate." I pulled her toward the door, not caring about her dignity. "You represent nothing. And if you do not walk out that door in the next 5 seconds, I will email the debt collectors your current location. They are very aggressive, Courtney. They might just come tow your car while you are sitting in it." Courtney went pale. She looked at me, then at the door. "Fine," she spat, smoothing her hair. "I will wait in the car. But if she confesses, I want it in writing." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed was heavy. I locked the deadbolt and turned back to Hattie, who was still trembling on the sofa. My father stood in the corner, silent for once, realizing that his money and anger were useless here. I walked over and sat on the coffee table directly in front of Hattie, lowering myself to her eye level. "She is gone, Hattie," I said softly. "No police. No prison. Just us. And I am not here to punish you. I just need to know why I do not have a family." I looked down at her hands, which were still shaking violently against the fabric of her worn dress. That was when I saw it. A thin, tarnished silver chain peeking out from under the sleeve of her cardigan. It was not jewelry. It was a service award. I recognized the small charm dangling from it immediately because I had seen the logo on the files in the basement. It was the crest of St. Jude Hospital. She had kept it for 34 years. A memento of the place where she had committed a crime that destroyed my life. "You loved being a nurse, did you not, Hattie?" I asked softly, reaching out to touch the bracelet. You did not want to hurt anyone. You were just doing what you were told. Hattie flinched as if I had burned her, withdrawing her hand and clutching it to her chest. I was a good nurse, she whispered, her voice cracking. I saved lives. I delivered hundreds of babies. I was the head nurse. I believe you, I said. But one baby did not get saved, Hattie. One baby got lost, and because of that, I spent my entire life being punished for a sin I did not commit. Look at him. I pointed to my father, who was standing in the shadows, his face etched with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. He has hated me since the day you handed me to him. He calls me the affair child. He treated my mother like a whore, all because of what happened in that room. Hattie looked at Elijah, and for the first time I saw the fear in her eyes turn into something else. Shame. Deep, crushing shame. She let out a small sob, her body sagging as if the strings holding her up had just been cut. I did not know, she wept. I did not know he would be cruel. I thought I was fixing it. I thought I was making sure everyone had a baby to hold. You did not fix it, Hattie, I said, leaning closer, my voice intense. You broke us. But you can fix it now. You are a woman of God. I saw you praying when we walked in. Do you think God wants you to take this secret to your grave? Or do you think he sent me here to give you a chance to confess? The old woman let out a wail that sounded like an animal in a trap. She dropped the rosary beads and covered her face with her hands, rocking back and forth on the sofa. I have prayed, she sobbed through her fingers. I have prayed to Jesus every single night for 30 years. I asked him to forgive me. I asked him to protect that little girl. I am that little girl, Hattie, I said, placing my hand gently on her shoulder. And I am listening. Tell me what happened in room 302. She lowered her hands slowly, wiping her wet cheeks. She looked at me, and I saw the dam break. The truth was coming. It was the storm, she whispered, staring past me into the ghosts of the past. The power went out. The generators were failing. It was chaos. And then the silence came. It was the kind of storm that old folks say brings the devil to your doorstep. Hattie began her story, her voice trembling but gaining strength with every word. She looked past me, past my father, staring into a memory that had haunted her for 3 decades. The hospital was understaffed that night. The power grid in the district was failing. We were running on backup generators, and the lights kept flickering like dying heartbeats. Dr. Evans was shouting orders, but the thunder was so loud it shook the instruments on the metal trays. Your mother came in screaming. She was in preterm labor, 7 months along. She was terrified, Elijah. She kept asking for you, but Dr. Evans would not let you in because he said it was too high risk. He did not want a civilian in the room if things went south, and things went south very quickly. Hattie paused, taking a ragged breath. The room was so quiet you could hear the rain drumming against the window like bullets. I watched my father, his face. He was pale, his skin taking on a gray, ashy tone. He was leaning against the wall for support, as if his legs had forgotten how to hold him up. The baby was breech, Hattie whispered. And the cord, it was wrapped around her neck. Not once, but twice. When the lights went out completely for 30 seconds, we were working by flashlight. In that darkness, Viola pushed one last time. I held my breath, waiting for the words that would change everything. There was no cry. Hattie said, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks. Babies are supposed to cry. They are supposed to scream when the cold air hits their lungs. But your baby was silent. She was blue, Elijah. We tried. God knows we tried. CPR, oxygen. But she was gone before she even took her first breath. My father let out a sound that I had never heard from him before. It was a low, guttural moan of pure agony. He slid down the wall until he was crouching on the dirty floor, his expensive suit gathering dust. He put his hands over his ears, as if trying to block out the truth, but Hattie kept talking. Viola passed out from the shock and the medication. She never saw the body. Dr. Evans made the call. He said it would kill her to know. He said she was too fragile. He told me to take the body to the morgue. So my child is dead, my father whispered, his voice broken. All these years. I thought you were the result of her cheating. I punished her. I punished you. But my daughter was already dead. He looked up at me, and the hatred that had been there for 34 years was gone, replaced by a hollow, devastating grief. He had not been raising a bastard. He had been raising a ghost while mourning a child he never knew he lost. But the question remained. If his child died in that room, then who was I, and how did I end up in his arms? Hattie wiped her eyes and looked at me. The tragedy was the beginning, she said. But the crime came next. Because just down the hall in the VIP suite, another tragedy was happening. A tragedy of a different kind. And that is where you came from. The room felt like it was spinning, but Hattie kept talking, her voice steady now that the burden of the secret was finally lifting. She told us that while my mother was grieving a silent birth in the darkness of room 302, a very different scene was playing out down the hall in the VIP suite. The backup generators were working there, keeping the lights bright on a 16-year-old girl named Sarah. She was crying not from pain, but from terror. She was the daughter of Senator Sterling, Hattie whispered, and the name hit my father like a physical blow. Senator Sterling was a legend in Georgia politics, a man who built his career on family values and conservative tradition. His daughter had made a mistake, Hattie continued. She had fallen in love with a boy from the other side of the tracks, a black boy. In 1990, that kind of thing could ruin a political career. When she went into labor, her parents did not call an ambulance. They called Dr. Evans. They brought her in through the back entrance. They wanted the baby gone. They told the girl she was giving the baby up for closed adoption, but I heard the senator talking in the hallway. He told Dr. Evans to make the problem disappear. He did not care where the baby went as long as it never came back to haunt his campaign. I listened, feeling a cold chill settle in my bones. I was not just an unwanted child. I was a scandal. I was the evidence of a forbidden relationship that powerful people had tried to erase. When Sarah gave birth to you, Hattie said, looking at me with wet eyes, you were perfect. You cried loud and strong. You had your mother as hazel eyes, and your father as skin. Sarah wanted to hold you, but her mother pulled you away before she could even touch you. They sedated her. They left you in the bassinet alone. Hattie took a deep breath, clutching her chest. I was standing in the hallway holding Viola's dead baby wrapped in a blanket. I was on my way to the morgue. But then I looked into the VIP room and I saw you. A healthy baby girl about to be thrown into the system or worse. And I thought of Viola. I thought of how broken she was. I thought of Elijah waiting in the hallway expecting a child. So I made a choice. My father made a choking sound, but Hattie ignored him. I went into the VIP room. The senator and his wife were arguing with the doctor in the corridor. No one was watching you. I took Viola's baby, the poor little thing that never took a breath, and I placed her in the bassinet in the VIP room. And then I took you. I wrapped you in the pink blanket meant for the Brooks baby. I walked back to room 302, and I placed you in Viola's arms. She was so groggy she did not even question it. She just saw a baby and she smiled. I stared at Hattie, my mind reeling. You stole me. I saved you, she insisted, leaning forward. The senator is family buried. Viola is baby thinking it was you. They thought their problem was dead. And Viola got to be a mother. I thought I was performing a miracle. I did not know Elijah would look at your skin and punish you for it. I did not know I was sentencing you to a life of hatred. My father stood up slowly. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. So for 34 years, he whispered, I have been hating a child who actually belongs to one of the most powerful white families in the state. I have been calling a senator's granddaughter a bastard. Hattie nodded. Yes. And if the Sterlings ever find out you are alive, they will not be happy. You are a loose end, Ebony. And powerful men like that know how to cut loose ends. I looked at my father, and for the first time we were on the same side. We were both victims of a lie that was much bigger than us. But we were also in danger. Because the truth I had just uncovered did not just change my past, it threatened my future. The revelation hit me harder than any physical blow I had ever taken. For 34 years, I had carried the heavy mantle of being unwanted. I believed I was the byproduct of a mistake, a moment of weakness that everyone regretted. But Hattie was telling me something entirely different. I was not debris. I was stolen goods. I sat on that stained floral sofa and felt the tectonic plates of my identity shifting beneath me. Who are they? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. If my mother was the senator, is daughter, who is my father? Hattie reached into the pocket of her housecoat and pulled out a folded, yellowed newspaper clipping. She handed it to me with trembling fingers. It was an obituary from 10 years ago, but the picture showed a young man with skin the color of deep mahogany and eyes that matched my own. His name was Marcus, Hattie said softly. He was not just some boy from the wrong side of the tracks. He was a prodigy, a cellist. He met Sarah at the conservatory. They were two brilliant musicians who fell in love. But Senator Sterling had plans for his daughter that did not involve a black musician. When Sarah got pregnant, Marcus tried to fight for you. He came to the hospital that night demanding to see his daughter. I looked at the photo of the man who had fought for me. He looked kind. What happened to him? I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Hattie looked down. The senator had him arrested for trespassing. A year later, he died in a car accident that many people said looked suspicious. But Sarah, she survived. You know her, Ebony. Everyone knows her. She is Sarah Vance. My breath hitched. Sarah Vance was not just a name, she was a legend. She was a world-renowned concert pianist who played for presidents and royalty. I had listened to her records on rainy nights, finding comfort in the melancholy of her music, never knowing that the hands playing those keys were the same hands that should have held me. She never married, Hattie continued. She dedicated her life to music. I saw an interview once where she said she plays to fill the silence of a loss she cannot speak about. She thinks you died that night, Ebony. Her parents told her the baby did not make it. They broke her heart to save their reputation. I stood up slowly, the newspaper clipping crinkling in my hand. The room felt too small for the magnitude of this truth. I looked at my father, Elijah. He was slumped in the corner, staring at me with a look of abject horror. He was realizing the magnitude of his mistake. He had spent decades abusing a child he thought was beneath him, only to find out that I came from a lineage of power and artistic genius that he could only dream of. You called me a bastard, I said, looking down at him. You treated me like I was dirty. But I am the daughter of a senator and a virtuoso. I come from love, Elijah. Real, dangerous, tragic love. And you. You are just the man who was lucky enough to be in the same room as me. The power dynamic in the room flipped instantly. I was no longer the beggar asking for a seat at the table. I was the queen who had just discovered her crown had been stolen. I was not just angry, I was vindicated. And I knew exactly what I had to do next. I was going to find Sarah Vance. And I was going to introduce her to the daughter she had mourned for half a lifetime. Here is the detailed script for Part 25, following the exact continuity and formatting requirements for AI voiceover. The realization hit Elijah Brooks like a physical blow. For decades he had walked through the world with his chin held high, convinced that his bloodline was superior and that I was the pollution in his pristine gene pool. He had mocked my hair, my skin, and my ambition. He had spent every Thanksgiving dinner making me feel small so he could feel big. But now he was standing in a run-down apartment facing the truth that I was not the one who was beneath him. In the twisted hierarchy of class and power that he worshipped, I was the one who was out of his league. Senator Sterling. He whispered the name tumbling from his lips like a prayer. He looked at me, and for the first time I did not see a father looking at a child. I saw a peasant looking at a queen. I punished you, he stammered, his voice thick with panic. I made you sleep in the attic. I made you pay for your own clothes. And you were a sterling. I treated a senator's daughter like a servant. It was not guilt that was eating him alive, it was the irony. The cosmic joke was so cruel that his heart simply could not take it. He had spent 34 years mourning a dead child he never saw while abusing a living child who represented the very power he craved. The cognitive dissonance was too much. I watched as the color drained from his face, turning his skin an ashy gray. He reached out a hand toward me, trembling violently. "Ebony," he gasped. "I did not know. You have to understand. If I had known—" "That is the problem, Elijah," I said, standing over him. "You only treat people with respect if you think they have a pedigree. You did not love me because you thought I was worthless. And now that you know I am valuable, it is too late. You cannot buy stock in a company after it has already gone public, and you certainly cannot buy a daughter after you have spent a lifetime selling her out." His eyes widened in terror. He tried to take a step forward, but his legs gave way. His left hand flew to his chest, clutching the silk lapel of his tuxedo, as if he were trying to rip his own heart out. A guttural sound escaped his throat, a terrible gurgling noise that sounded like a drowning man. "Dad," I said, stepping forward instinctively despite myself. He did not answer. His knees hit the dirty linoleum floor with a sickening thud. He swayed for a second, looking at Hattie, then at me, his eyes rolling back in his head. Then he collapsed completely, falling forward onto his face. Elijah Hattie screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. She turned him over. He was conscious, but barely. His breath was coming in short, shallow gasps, and his hand was clawing at the air. "My chest," he wheezed, his voice barely audible. "It hurts. It is justice, Elijah," I thought as I looked down at him. "It is the weight of 34 years of hate sitting right on your chest." But I was not a monster. I was not him. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. As I gave the operator the address, I watched the man who had been my tormentor turn into a helpless old man, writhing on the floor of a stranger's apartment. The karma was immediate, and it was brutal. He had wanted to destroy my life, but the truth had just destroyed his heart. The sound of my father hitting the floor was heavy and final, like a tree falling in a forest. Hattie was wailing, a high-pitched sound of pure terror, clutching her chest as if she were the one dying. But it was Courtney's reaction that froze my blood. In a normal world, when a family member collapses, you rush to their side. You check for a pulse, you call for help, but Courtney did not live in a normal world. She lived in a world where people were only as valuable as their bank accounts. Instead of kneeling beside the man who had funded her lifestyle for 5 years, Courtney lunged for his tuxedo jacket. She was not checking for a heartbeat. She was checking his pockets. "Where is it?" she hissed, her eyes wild and frantic. She ripped open his jacket, ignoring his gasping breaths. "Where is the draft? He had the new will in here. I saw him put it in." "Courtney, what are you doing?" I screamed, dropping to my knees beside my father. "Call 911. He is having a heart attack." She ignored me. Her hands were clawing at his chest, pulling out the folded papers we had brought from the lawyer's office. She found the DNA test results and the contract I had signed. She scrambled backward, clutching the papers to her chest like a shield. "No," she muttered, pacing the small room. "If he dies now, the old will stand. But if he lives, he changes everything. He cuts Dante out. He cuts me out." She looked at me, and her eyes were completely void of humanity. "Do not call them Ebony. Just wait. Just give it 10 minutes. Let nature take its course." I stared at her in horror. She was effectively suggesting murder by negligence. She was willing to let a man die on a dirty linoleum floor just to ensure she didn't have to downgrade her SUV. "You are sick," I spat. I lunged at her, shoving her hard enough that she stumbled back into the television set. I snatched my phone from my pocket and dialed emergency services, putting it on speaker as I turned back to Elijah. He was turning blue. His breathing was shallow and rattling. "Dispatcher, I have a 60-year-old male in cardiac arrest," I shouted clearly into the phone. "We are at the Towers apartment 4B. Send paramedics now." I loosened his tie and tilted his head back to clear his airway. My hands were shaking, but my training took over. I placed my hands on his chest, feeling the erratic flutter of his heart. This was the man who had called me a bastard. This was the man who had locked me out in the rain. This was the man who had hated me for simply existing. And yet here I was, fighting to keep air in his lungs while his chosen family stood in the corner wishing him dead. Courtney stood by the window watching me work with a look of pure disgust. "You are an idiot," she sneered. "You are saving a man who would not spit on you if you were on fire. Let him go, Ebony. If he wakes up, he destroys us all." I ignored her, counting the rhythm of his breathing. "I am not you, Courtney," I said without looking up. "I do not let people die for money. That is the difference between us. You married a Brooks for the name. I was born with a heart you will never understand." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Courtney went pale. She realized that if he survived, her hesitation would be the first thing I told him. She dropped the papers and tried to compose her face into a mask of concern, but it was too late. I had seen the monster underneath the makeup. And once Elijah woke up, I was going to make sure he saw it too. The rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor was the only music Elijah Brooks would hear for a long time. It was a stark contrast to the symphonies he claimed to love but never understood. I stood at the foot of his bed in the intensive care unit, watching the machine breathe for him. The rise and fall of his chest was mechanical and jerky. The stroke he suffered in Hattie Mae's apartment had been catastrophic. It had not killed him, but it had done something far more poetic. It had silenced him. Dr. Aris stood beside me, holding a tablet with the grim results of the MRI. "It is a condition called locked-in syndrome," he explained, keeping his voice low. "The hemorrhage caused severe damage to the brainstem. He is fully conscious, Ebony. He can hear us. He can process everything we are saying. But he has complete paralysis of nearly all voluntary muscles. He cannot speak. He cannot move his limbs. He can only move his eyes vertically. 1 blink for yes, 2 blinks for no." I looked down at the man who had spent 34 years barking orders at me. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling in sheer terror. He heard every word. He knew he was trapped in a prison of his own flesh. Courtney was standing near the door, checking her watch. She stepped forward the moment the doctor stopped talking. "Well, if he is a vegetable, we need to discuss palliative care. Keeping him on life support is draining the estate. As his daughter-in-law and the wife of his biological heir, I think we should let nature take its course." I turned to her slowly. My face was calm, but my voice was ice. "You do not get to think, Courtney. You do not get to speak." She bristled, her hands going to her hips. "Excuse me. Dante is his son. I am his proxy." "Actually, you are not," I said, pulling a document from my purse. It was the medical power of attorney Elijah had signed 5 years ago after a minor scare. He had never updated it because he was too arrogant to believe he would ever need it again. It lists me as the primary agent for all medical decisions. I am the only one who decides who stays and who goes. Courtney turned a shade of pale, usually reserved for dead fish. She looked at the document, then at me, realizing she had just lost the war. "Get out," I said, pointing to the door, "and tell security that if you or Dante try to enter this floor again, I will have you arrested for harassment." Courtney fled without a word. The doctor excused himself, leaving me alone with my father. I walked to the side of the bed and gripped the metal rail. Elijah's eyes snapped to mine. They were wild, frantic. He blinked rapidly, trying to communicate, trying to beg. I leaned in close, so he could see the hazel eyes he had despised for so long. "I am not going to kill you, Elijah," I whispered. "That would be too easy. I am going to keep you alive. I am going to hire the best nurses and the best therapists. I want you to live a very long time, because I want you to be awake and conscious when I find my real mother. I want you to watch from this bed as I take my place in a world you only pretended to belong to." You are going to watch me win, and you will not be able to say a single word to stop me." He blinked once. A tear leaked from the corner of his eye and rolled into his ear. It was the first time he had ever cried for anyone other than himself. I wiped it away gently, not out of love, but out of pity. The tyrant had fallen, and I was finally free. Dante was leaning against the beige wall of the hospital corridor, sobbing into a handkerchief that looked suspiciously dry. It was a performance worthy of a daytime soap opera. He was loud enough to attract sympathy from the passing nurses, but quiet enough to avoid being asked to leave. I watched him through the glass of the waiting room. He was not crying for his father. He was crying for the credit limit that was about to be frozen. Courtney had undoubtedly called him in a panic, breaking the news that I was now the gatekeeper of the estate. I looked down at the medical tablet I was still holding. It contained the comprehensive intake forms for Elijah Brooks. My eyes scanned the data automatically, my forensic accountant brain looking for patterns even in tragedy. I stopped at the line for blood type. A B negative. It was the rarest blood type in the world, found in less than 1% of the population. My mind flashed back to the nursing home. I remembered the desperate grip of Viola Represent's hand. I remembered the way she looked at me with those milky, terrified eyes and whispered, "I am sorry." At the time, I thought she was apologizing for the baby swap. I thought she was apologizing for raising a stolen child. But as I looked at Dante slumping against the wall, a cold realization washed over me. Viola was not a mastermind capable of orchestrating a complex adoption fraud alone. She was a woman who lived in fear of her husband Represent's temper. She was a woman who would do anything to keep the peace. I looked at Dante again. He had a weak chin. He had pale blue eyes that were watery and indecisive. He had absolutely none of Elijah Represent's sharp predatory features. For 34 years, Elijah had claimed Dante was his pride and joy, his biological proof of manhood, while casting me aside as the mongrel. He had never questioned Dante Represent's paternity, because Dante was a boy, and in Elijah Represent's archaic mind, that was all that mattered. But biology does not care about patriarchy. I unlocked my phone and pulled up a simple medical reference chart. If Elijah was a B negative and Viola was O positive, which I knew she was from her donor card, then their biological offspring could only be type A or type B. They could not produce a child with type O blood. And I remembered distinctly from a childhood accident that Dante was O positive. The math did not add up. The implications were staggering. Elijah had spent his life tormenting the child of a senator, thinking she was a bastard while doting on a son who might not even share a single drop of his blood. Viola Represent's apology had not just been about me. It had been about the entire lie. She had been playing a shell game with genetics to keep Elijah happy, and he had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. Dante finished his bottle of water and tossed it carelessly into the recycling bin next to the elevator before wiping his nose on his sleeve. He looked around, ensuring no one was watching, then pulled out his phone, probably to check his sports betting app. I stood up. This was it. The final nail in the coffin. I did not just want to win the estate. I wanted to burn the entire false legacy of the Brooks family to the ground. I waited for Dante to step into the restroom. I walked calmly to the recycling bin and reached in. The plastic bottle was still cold. I pulled a sterile evidence bag from my purse, which I always carried for work, and dropped the bottle inside. "I'm going to run one more test," I whispered to myself, looking at the sealed bag. If I was right, then Elijah Brooks had no children, no heir, no legacy. He was just a sad, angry man who had been king of a castle built entirely on sand. I walked toward the elevators, my heels clicking a rhythm of impending doom. The first DNA test had freed me. This second one was going to destroy them. The air in the private suite was thick with the scent of lilies and impending death. My father lay in the center of the room, a prisoner in his own body, his eyes darting frantically from corner to corner. Courtney sat by the window filing her nails with a rhythmic rasping sound, while Dante sprawled in the visitor chair eating a turkey sandwich and watching a football game on his phone with the volume turned down. They looked like vultures waiting for the carcass to cool. They did not hear me enter. I closed the door softly behind me, the latch clicking with a finality that made Dante jump. He looked up, wiping mayonnaise from his chin with the back of his hand. "What are you doing here?" he grumbled. "I thought we established you are not family." I ignored him, walking past the bed to stand directly in front of Courtney. I held a single white envelope in my hand, identical to the one that had ruined my life just weeks ago. But this one was not for me. "Actually, Dante," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm, "we established that I am not a Brooks. But we never really checked your credentials, did we?" Courtney stopped filing her nails. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "What is that?" I tossed the envelope onto her lap. It slid across her silk skirt and landed on the floor. "It is the results of a paternity test I ran this morning using the saliva from Dante represents water bottle. Since I am the medical proxy, I needed to ensure there were no genetic anomalies that could affect Elijah represents treatment." Courtney laughed, a brittle, nervous sound. "You are pathetic. You are trying to say Dante is not his son. He looks just like him." "Open it, Courtney," I ordered. "Read it loud enough for Elijah to hear." She hesitated, looking at the envelope like it was a pipe bomb. Then with a sneer, she bent down and picked it up. She tore it open with aggressive, jagged movements. She pulled out the paper, her eyes scanning the text, quickly expecting to find nothing but my own desperation. But then she stopped. The color drained from her face so fast, she looked like she might faint. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Read it," I said, my voice cracking like a whip. "We tested the genetic markers of Elijah Brooks against the subject Dante Brooks," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The probability of paternity is 0%. Dante dropped his sandwich. It hit the floor with a wet splat. What he stammered, standing up. "That is a lie. That is a fake. Mom never cheated. She was a saint. She was a survivor, Dante," I said, turning to look at him. "Dad is AB negative. Mom was O positive. It is biologically impossible for them to produce an O positive child like you. Mom knew Elijah would kill her if she did not give him a son. So she found one. Maybe from a lover. Maybe from a clinic. It does not matter. The only thing that matters is that you are just as much a stranger here as I am." I turned to the bed. Elijah represents eyes were wide open, bulging with a horror that transcended physical pain. The monitor beeping accelerated, matching the panic in his heart. He was realizing the full scope of the cosmic joke. He had disowned the daughter of a senator to leave his fortune to the son of a nobody. He had spent his life worshipping a bloodline that ended with him. "Viola played you, Elijah," I whispered, leaning over the rail. "She played us all. You have no heirs. You have no legacy. You are the last of the Brooks line, and it dies in this bed with you." The room was silent, save for the frantic beeping of the machine. Courtney looked at Dante with pure disgust, realizing her golden ticket was a fraud. Dante looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. And Elijah just stared at the ceiling, tears streaming into his ears, drowning in the truth he had spent a lifetime avoiding. The house of cards had not just fallen, it had been incinerated. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bones. Dante stood frozen, his face pale and slack, staring at the piece of paper that had just erased his identity. Courtney looked at him not with sympathy, but with the cold calculation of a woman realizing she had bet on the wrong horse. But I was not looking at them. I was looking at Elijah. His eyes were locked on mine, pleading for this to be a lie, pleading for me to stop. But I was not done. The surgery was not complete until all the cancer was cut out. I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, worn leather diary. I had found it in Viola Represents safety deposit box when I took over her financial affairs. It smelled of her lavender perfume and old secrets. "You always treated Mom like she was stupid, Elijah," I said, opening the book to a page marked with a dried rose petal. "You thought she was just a trophy you could polish when you wanted and ignore when you were bored. You thought she did not notice your emotional affairs. You thought she did not see the way you looked at other women, the way you mentally replaced her every single day. But she saw everything, and she decided to replace you first. I began to read aloud, my voice steady in the quiet room. December 12th, 1992. Elijah told me today that he wants a son. He wants a legacy. He looks at me with such disdain, as if my body is a failure because of what happened with the first baby. He does not touch me. He barely speaks to me. But Thomas speaks to me. Thomas brings me flowers from the garden he tends. He touches me like I am precious. Elijah wants a son. I will give him a son. But he will never be a Brooks. He will be a child of love, not obligation. I closed the book and looked at Dante. You remember Thomas, don't you, Dante? The head gardener. The one who taught you how to whittle. The one who taught you how to plant hydrangeas. You used to spend hours in the greenhouse with him. You cried for a week when he was fired. Dante stumbled back until his legs hit the wall. No, he whispered. That is just the gardener. He was your father, Dante, I said, and the irony is sickening. I turned back to the bed where Elijah lay paralyzed. For 32 years you paraded Dante around the country club. You bragged about his hands. You said, "Look at those strong hands, those are Brooks' hands." You said he had your work ethic. You said he was a chip off the old block. But he was not. He was the gardener, represents son. You spent millions of dollars educating and clothing the child of the man who mowed your lawn. Elijah represents eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of rage. The vein in his forehead pulsed. He was realizing that his entire life was a farce. He had rejected the daughter of a senator to raise the son of a laborer. He had called himself a king, but he had been the court jester the entire time, dancing to a tune Viola played from the shadows. Viola did not just cheat on you, Elijah, I said, leaning in close. She dismantled you. She let you build your entire ego around a lie. Every time you hugged Dante, every time you praised him, you were mocking yourself. She watched you do it for 3 decades. She got her revenge every single day over breakfast. I dropped the diary onto the bed next to his paralyzed hand. The truth is out, Elijah. You have nothing. Your bloodline is dead. Your wife hated you. Your son is a stranger. And the only person left standing, the only person with the power to save you or destroy you, is the girl you threw away. Welcome to your new reality. The silence in the hospital room was shattered not by a sob, but by a scream of pure, unadulterated rage. It came from Courtney. She had been standing by the window processing the information with the cold efficiency of a forensic accountant. While Dante was mourning the loss of his father, and I was watching Elijah mourn the loss of his ego, Courtney was doing the math. And the result was 0. She spun around her face, twisted into a mask of ugly realization. She did not look at me, not look at. She looked at Dante, who was still sitting on the floor staring at the gardener represents diary like a lost child. Courtney marched over to him, her heels clicking like gunshots on the linoleum. She grabbed him by the lapels of his wrinkled jacket and hauled him to his feet with a strength born of pure financial panic. "You idiot!" she shrieked, shaking him violently. "Do you know what this means? Do you have any idea what your mother just did to us?" Dante blinked, looking at her with confused, watery eyes. "Courtney, stop. I just found out my dad is not my dad. Give me a minute." "You do not have a minute," she screamed, spitting in his face. "You do not have a dad, Dante, and more importantly, you do not have a trust fund." I read the will. I memorized it. Elijah left everything to his biological issue. That is the legal term, Dante. Biological issue. If you are the gardener, represent son, you get nothing. You are worthless. She shoved him backward and he stumbled, tripping over the visitor chair and crashing into the wall. The noise made Elijah represent's eyes widen in his paralyzed face. He was watching his perfect daughter-in-law, the woman he had praised for her breeding and style, unravel into a banshee. "Courtney, please," Dante stammered, holding his hands up. "We are still married. We can figure this out." Married? She laughed, a high-pitched sound that bordered on hysteria. She began struggling with her left hand, yanking at the 3-carat diamond ring on her finger. Do you think I married you for your personality? Do you think I listened to your boring stories about golf and craft beer because I found you fascinating? I married the Brooks estate. I married the house in the Hamptons. I married the black card. She finally wrenched the ring off her finger and threw it at him. It hit him in the chest and bounced onto the floor, rolling under the hospital bed. I did not sign up to be the wife of a landscaper represents bastard, she yelled. I am not going to shop at Target, Dante. I am not going to fly coach. You are a fraud. You tricked me. You wasted 5 years of my prime on a lie. She lunged at him again, clawing at his face, her nails leaving angry red welts on his cheek. Dante did not fight back. He just stood there, taking the abuse too broken to defend himself. I pressed the call button for security, my face impassive. I watched as Courtney unraveled, completely screaming about her student loans and her credit score. She was not a wife grieving a loss. She was an investor realizing her stock had just crashed to zero. 2 security guards burst into the room, grabbing Courtney by the arms. She kicked and screamed, cursing Dante, cursing Elijah, and cursing the day she met the Brooks family. As they dragged her out into the hallway, her voice echoed back to us. I hope you rot, she screamed. I hope you all rot in hell. The door swung shut, leaving a ringing silence in its wake. Dante slid down the wall, burying his face in his hands. Elijah stared at the ceiling, his chest heaving. He had spent his life believing that money bought loyalty. Now he knew the truth. Money only rented people like Courtney. And the moment the rent check bounced, they became wolves. The transition of power was not a battle. It was a signature. 2 days after the hospital incident, I sat at the head of the mahogany table in the Brooks Enterprises boardroom. Mr. Henderson sat to my right, looking pale and defeated. The DNA results had legally nullified Dante's claim to the estate, and with Elijah incapacitated by a massive stroke, the company bylaws were clear. Control reverted to the court-appointed conservator. And thanks to the medical power of attorney and my impeccable standing as a forensic accountant, that conservator was me. I signed the final document with a smooth, practiced motion. The ink was barely dry when I turned to the head of security. Change the locks, I said. Revoke all access badges for Dante Brooks and Courtney Brooks. Freeze the company accounts they have access to. Effective immediately. I did not wait for a response. I stood up and walked out to my car. The final piece of business was personal. When I pulled up to the Brooks estate, the iron gates were open. I drove up the winding driveway that I had walked down so many times in tears. Today, I drove a black Mercedes, and I was not crying. I found Dante and Courtney in the foyer. They were not packing. They were looting. Courtney was stuffing silver candlesticks into a Louis Vuitton duffel bag, while Dante was trying to wrap a painting in a blanket. Stop! I said, my voice echoing off the marble floors. They froze. Courtney dropped a candlestick. It clattered loudly against the stone. You have 30 minutes, I said, checking my watch, and you are leaving with personal effects only. Clothing and toiletries. Everything else stays. The silver, the art, the cars. It all belongs to the estate, and the estate is under new management. You cannot do this, Dante shouted, his face red. I grew up here. This is my home. It was never your home, Dante, I replied calmly. It was a stage, and the play is over. You are a gardener represents son, who lived like a prince on stolen money. The ride ends today. Courtney lunged forward, her eyes manic. We have rights. We have tenancy rights. You have to give us 30 days to evict us. Actually, I do not, I said, motioning to the 2 police officers who had just stepped through the front door. You are trespassing, since neither of you has a valid lease, and neither of you is a biological relative of the owner. You are simply intruders. You can leave voluntarily, or you can leave in handcuffs. Courtney looked at the officers, then at the half-filled bag of silver. She dropped the bag. She grabbed her purse and stormed past me, deliberately bumping my shoulder. I will sue you, she hissed. With what money, Courtney? I asked. I canceled the credit cards an hour ago. Dante looked at me one last time. He looked small. He looked like the fraud he was. He did not say a word. He just walked out the door, his shoulders slumped in defeat. I stood in the doorway and watched them walk down the long driveway. They had no car because the keys to the Range Rover and the Porsche were in my pocket. They were walking. Two people who had thought they owned the world were now walking into a future where they were nothing. I closed the heavy oak door with a solid final thud. The house was silent. It was empty. And for the first time in 34 years, it was finally clean. Sending that email was the hardest thing I had ever done. I drafted it a dozen times, deleting words, typing them back, trying to find the right balance between professional detachment and the desperate cry of a lost child. In the end, I kept it simple. I attached a photo of myself and a scanned copy of Hattie Mae Represents Confession. I sent it to the management agency of Sarah Vance, the world-renowned pianist. I expected a long silence or perhaps a legal cease and desist from the senator. I did not expect a phone call 20 minutes later from a woman who could not speak through her sobbing. 48 hours later, I stood on the tarmac of a private airfield on the outskirts of Atlanta. The wind whipped my coat around my legs, but I did not feel the cold. I watched as a sleek Gulfstream jet descended from the clouds, its engines screaming a high-pitched whine that sounded like victory. On the tail was the Sterling family crest. It was not gaudy like the gold-plated nonsense Elijah Brooks loved. It was understated, elegant, and powerful. The stairs lowered, and for a moment, no one moved. Then a woman stepped into the light. Sarah Vance was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or surgery. She wore her age like a badge of honor, her silvering hair pulled back in a severe bun that highlighted high cheekbones that mirrored my own. She gripped the railing, her knuckles white. Behind her stood Senator Sterling. He looked older than his pictures, shrunken by time and perhaps by guilt, but his eyes were sharp. Sarah did not walk down the stairs. She ran. She stumbled onto the tarmac, ignoring the flight crew and the security detail. She stopped 3 feet away from me, her chest heaving. She reached out a hand, trembling violently as if she were afraid I was a mirage that would vanish if she touched me. "Ebony," she whispered. It was the first time I had heard my name spoken with pure, unconditional love. I nodded, unable to speak. She closed the gap and pulled me into her arms. It was not a polite hug. It was a collision. She buried her face in my neck, sobbing with a force that shook her entire body. I felt a dam break inside me. For 34 years, I had held myself together with steel and logic. I had been the unwanted child, the mistake, the outsider. But in her arms, I felt the armor disintegrate. I smelled jasmine and old sheet music. I smelled home. "You have his eyes," she cried, pulling back to cup my face. "You have Marcus Represents eyes. I thought I lost you both. I thought I was alone." The senator stepped forward. He leaned on a cane, looking at me with a mixture of awe and shame. He saw the luxury car parked behind me. He saw the way I carried myself. He realized that despite his best efforts to erase me, I had not just survived. I had thrived. "I was wrong," he said, his voice raspy. He did not offer excuses. He did not talk about politics or reputation. He simply bowed his head in a gesture of surrender. "I was wrong, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness." Sarah took my hand, intertwining her fingers with mine. They were long, slender pianist fingers identical to my own. "Come home," she said, "not to that house of lies you left behind. Come to Vienna with us. Come hear me play. I wrote a concerto for you. I have played it every night for 30 years, waiting for you to hear it." I looked back at the city skyline, where Elijah Brooks lay paralyzed in a hospital bed, and where Dante and Courtney were wandering the streets with nothing. That world was small and petty. I turned back to Sarah and the senator. I looked at the plane waiting to take me to a life of art and legacy. I am ready, I said, squeezing her hand. I walked up the stairs of the jet, leaving the Brooks name on the tarmac. I was no longer an accountant auditing a fraudulent life. I was a daughter returning to her true history. And for the first time in my life, the balance sheet was finally full. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. This room had been forbidden to me as a child. It was the sanctuary of the king, a place where Elijah Brooks made decrees that ruined lives. Now it was my dressing room. I stood before the gilded full-length mirror, smoothing the lapels of my charcoal Tom Ford suit. The fabric was cool and expensive under my fingers. The reflection staring back was sharp, composed, and terrifyingly powerful. In the background of the reflection, sitting in a motorized wheelchair, positioned specifically to face the window, was Elijah. He was dressed impeccably in a cashmere sweater and pressed trousers. I paid the nurses a fortune to make sure he looked dignified, but the dignity ended at his neck. His face was frozen in a permanent mask of slack-jawed silence. Only his eyes moved. They darted frantically from the manicured lawn outside to my reflection in the mirror. They were wet with a mixture of regret and visceral fear. I turned around slowly, the heels of my shoes sinking into the plush Persian rug. I walked over to him and crouched down so we were eye level. The hum of his oxygen concentrator was the only sound in the cavernous house. "Look at this place, Elijah," I said softly, gesturing to the room, the estate, the empire beyond the window. "It is quiet now, isn't it? The noise is gone. Courtney is gone, chasing another wallet to drain. Dante is gone, working at a landscaping crew 3 towns over, trying to learn the trade his real father mastered. Viola is in her own world." His eyes locked onto mine. He blinked once. A tear spilled over, trying to escape the prison of his body. "You spent 34 years trying to curate the perfect family." I continued, my voice devoid of malice. "You wanted a pure bloodline. You wanted brilliance. You wanted loyalty. You were so obsessed with the packaging that you never checked the contents. You threw away a diamond because you thought it was glass, and you polished a stone thinking it was a gem." I reached out and adjusted the blanket on his lap. He flinched internally. I could see it in his pupils, but he could not pull away. He was forced to endure my touch, just as he was forced to endure my charity. "You were right, Dad," I whispered, using the title not as a sign of respect, but as a final stinging irony. "I am not your daughter. I do not have your blood. I do not have your name. I belong to a lineage of artists and leaders, people with souls far deeper than your bank account." I stood up, towering over him. The sun caught the gold watch on my wrist. It was his watch. I wore it now. "But here is the truth that will keep you awake at night, Elijah. I am the only one who stayed. The son you worshipped abandoned you the moment the money ran dry. The wife you trophyized betrayed you. The daughter-in-law you admired left you to die on a dirty floor. I am the stranger. I am the intruder. And I am the only person on this earth who cared enough to keep your heart beating." I walked to the door, grabbing my briefcase. I paused with my hand on the brass knob and looked back at him one last time. "That is my punishment for you, Elijah. You have to live. You have to sit in this chair every single day and watch the bastard child run your empire better than you ever did. You have to watch me succeed. You have to receive my mercy knowing you never earned it." I opened the door. "Have a good day, Elijah. I will see you at dinner." I walked out, closing the door on the man who had been a god in his own mind. He was alone now, trapped in the silence he had created, attended to by the ghost he had failed to exorcise. The game was over. And as I walked down the grand staircase toward the future, I realized that the best revenge was not destroying your enemy. It was letting him watch you live. The tragic downfall of Elijah Brooks and the triumphant rise of Ebony offers a profound lesson on the true nature of value and legacy. Elijah spent 34 years obsessed with the superficial markers of good breeding, bloodline status, and control. He mistook genetic biology for loyalty and abused the one person who actually possessed the strength and character to uphold his empire. His prejudice blinded him to the reality that the son he idolized was a hollow vessel, while the daughter he rejected was a diamond wrapped in a mystery. This story teaches us that true nobility isn't found in a birth certificate or a bank account. It is found in resilience, integrity, and the choices we make when the world turns against us. It serves as a stark warning that karma is real and patient. The energy you put into the world will eventually return to you. Elijah's punishment wasn't death, but the agonizing clarity of seeing exactly what he threw away. In the end, we learned that family isn't defined by whose blood you carry, but by who remains standing by your side when the walls come crashing down. If you enjoyed this saga of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate twist of fate, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with someone who needs a reminder that the truth always wins.